Imagine a world without a dawn, not a fleeting eclipse, but an eternal twilight where the sun has vanished from the sky. This was the reality for the gods and mortals of ancient Japan when their most radiant deity, Amaterasu Omikami, the goddess of the sun, withdrew her light from creation. Driven by grief and fury at the transgressions of her tempestuous brother, she sealed herself away in a celestial rock cave, plunging the heavens and the earth into a profound and chilling stillness. As crops failed and malevolent spirits began to stir, the myriad gods of the pantheon faced a desperate question. How do you persuade the sun itself to return? Their solution was not one of force, but of divine ingenuity, sacred artistry, and a moment of cosmic laughter that would echo through the ages. This is the story of the day the light died, and the celestial plot to bring it back. In the age of myth, before the world knew a steady sun, there was creation and loss. The divine couple, Izanagi and Izanami, stood upon the floating bridge of heaven, stirring the nebulous ocean below with a jeweled spear. From the brine that dripped from its tip, the first islands of Japan were formed. They populated this new land with countless deities, the spirits of mountains, rivers, and trees. But their creative partnership ended in tragedy. In giving birth to the fire god, Izanami was terribly burned and departed for Yomi, the shadowy land of the dead. Distraught, Izanagi embarked on a perilous journey to retrieve her, a desperate quest to reunite the divine pair. He found her in the oppressive gloom, but she was no longer the radiant being he knew. When he broke his promise not to look upon her and lit a torch, he saw a decaying form, a sight that sent him fleeing in terror. He barely escaped the underworld, pursued by its foul denizens, and sealed the entrance with a massive boulder, a permanent separation between the worlds of the living and the dead. This harrowing ordeal left him tainted by the impurities of death. To restore his divine essence, he sought out a river in the sunlit land of the living to perform a sacred cleansing ritual. As he disrobed and stepped into the clear, flowing water, he began to wash away the residue of the underworld. With each act of purification, new gods were born from his discarded garments and the grime he washed away. But the most significant creations were yet to come. He submerged his face in the cool stream, rinsing the last vestiges of shadow from his being. As he washed his left eye, a being of unparalleled brilliance and purity emerged. She was born not of flesh, but of light itself, a goddess so radiant that she instantly illuminated the entire world around her. This was Amaterasu, the great deity who shines from heaven. Izanagi rejoiced. From his greatest sorrow and a journey into the deepest shadow, he had brought forth the most magnificent light. She was a promise of order, a beacon of life, and her destiny was to govern all that was good and bright in the cosmos. The miraculous birth of the sun goddess was only the beginning of Izanagi's profound act of creation. As he continued his purification ritual in the sacred river, the cosmos prepared to welcome two more monumental forces. Having brought forth the sun from his left eye, Izanagi then washed his right. From this act, another deity emerged, a perfect counterpart to his sister's fiery brilliance. This was Tsukuyomi, the god of the moon. His light was not the blazing gold of the sun, but a cool, serene silver that promised tranquility to the night. He was calm, orderly, and possessed a quiet dignity, a perfect balance to his siblings' vibrant energy. Finally, Izanagi washed his nose, and from this last act of cleansing, a third and final noble child was born. This was Susanoo, a god crackling with untamed power. He was not a being of steady light, but of raw, unpredictable force, the god of the sea and storms. His spirit was as tempestuous as the oceans he would one day command, capable of both awesome power and terrible destruction. Izanagi, his purification complete, looked upon his three remarkable children, who would come to be known as the Three Noble Children. He saw in them the fundamental pillars of the universe, the day, the night, and the powerful forces of nature that raged between them. He decided to divide his celestial kingdom, bestowing upon each a domain suited to their nature. To his most glorious child, Amaterasu, he gave the high heavenly plane, making her the ruler of the sky, the sun, and the cosmos itself. He handed her his sacred beaded necklace, a symbol of her divine authority. To Tsukuyomi, he granted dominion over the realm of the night, a kingdom of silver light and quiet order. Both accepted their roles with grace. But when Izanagi turned to Susanoo and granted him rule over the vast, churning seas, the storm god was not pleased. A deep dissatisfaction took root in his heart. While his siblings prepared to govern their celestial realms, Susanoo began to lament his fate, his cries echoing with the force of a rising gale. The perfect cosmic order, established just moments before, was already threatened by the turbulent heart of its most volatile guardian. Amaterasu ascended to her designated realm, the high heavenly plane, a celestial paradise that reflected her own divine nature. Under her benevolent gaze, this heavenly sphere became a model of perfect order and harmony. It was a world bathed in perpetual gentle light, where every aspect of existence was aligned with cosmic law and tranquility. Her rule was not one of passive radiance. She was an active and diligent sovereign. She established the celestial rice paddies, cultivating the sacred grain that would become the foundation of life and prosperity for the world below. This act symbolized her role as the source of sustenance and agricultural abundance. The rhythmic cycle of planting and harvesting in her heavenly fields mirrored the order she brought to the universe. She also presided over the sacred weaving hall, where her attendants wove the magnificent garments of the gods. This was more than mere craft. It was a metaphor for the weaving of fate, time, and the very fabric of an orderly society. Through her guidance, the principles of civilization, agriculture, craftsmanship, and social structure were established as divine ideals. Amaterasu was the ultimate source of legitimacy and life. As the ancestress of the imperial family of Japan, she connected the earthly throne to the divine will of the heavens. Her authority was absolute, her wisdom unquestioned. The other gods of the heavenly plane revered her, carrying out their duties in a state of peaceful cooperation. For a long age, her realm knew only serenity. There were no conflicts, no chaos, no challenges to her authority. The high heavenly plane was a testament to her power to create and sustain a perfect world, a stark contrast to the churning, untamed seas ruled by her restless brother, Susanoo. Every morning, her light brought life and clarity, and every action she took reinforced the stability of the cosmos. But even in this flawless paradise, a shadow of foreboding lingered. The peace was so complete, so absolute, that it seemed fragile. While Amaterasu meticulously maintained the balance of the heavens, the discontent simmering in her brother's heart was a distant but growing storm, threatening to one day break upon the shores of her serene kingdom. While Amaterasu governed a realm of serene light, her brother Susanoo languished in his. The vast, chaotic expanse of the sea was a mirror of his own spirit, yet it brought him no comfort. Instead of bringing order to his domain, he abandoned his duties entirely. He began to wail and rage, his divine sorrow having a catastrophic effect on the mortal world. His ceaseless crying caused the green mountains to wither and the rivers and seas to dry up. An air of calamity spread throughout the land, all stemming from the storm, God's profound unhappiness. He did not want the ocean. He wanted to visit his mother, Izanami, in the dark land of Yomi. This desire was a grave transgression, a rejection of his sacred duty, and a yearning for the realm of the dead over the world of the living. His father, the great god Izanagi, was incensed by this dereliction. Seeing the destruction his son's grief was causing, he confronted Susanoo. For his refusal to rule and his unnatural wish to enter the underworld, Izanagi banished him from the celestial realms altogether. This paternal rejection did not quell Susanoo's rage, it only redirected it. His jealousy and resentment, once a formless sorrow, now found a target: his successful and beloved sister, Amaterasu. Before departing for his exile, Susanoo announced that he would ascend to the high heavenly plane one last time to bid her farewell. But his journey was anything but peaceful. As he moved toward her realm, the earth shook and the mountains trembled. His approach was a whirlwind of fury and raw power, the advance of an invading army, not the quiet visit of a departing brother. From her celestial palace, Amaterasu felt the tremors. She saw the turmoil her brother's ascent was causing, and knew instantly that his heart was not pure. She did not believe he came to say goodbye. She believed he came to conquer, to steal her realm, and extinguish her light. The bond of kinship was broken by deep suspicion. In that moment, the serene goddess of order vanished. Amaterasu prepared herself for war. She bound her hair in the manner of a warrior, slung a quiver of 1,000 arrows over her back, and took up a mighty bow. She stood at the celestial bridge, the entrance to her kingdom, transformed into a fearsome guardian, ready to face the storm she knew was coming. At the threshold of heaven, the two siblings faced each other, one a tempest of raw emotion, the other a pillar of defiant order. Susanoo, seeing his sister prepared for battle, feigned innocence. He insisted his intentions were sincere and proposed a divine contest to prove his purity of heart. Each would take an object from the other and use it to create new deities. The nature of the gods born would reveal the truth of their intentions. Amaterasu, perhaps hoping to de-escalate the volatile situation, agreed. She took his 10-span sword, broke it into 3 pieces, and from the fragments brought forth 3 graceful female deities. Then, Susanoo took his sister's string of 500 sacred beads. He crunched them, and from his breath produced 5 bold and assertive male deities. Citing the birth of the male gods as proof of his masculine sincerity and power, Susanoo declared himself the victor. In a fateful decision, Amaterasu conceded his claim, hoping this would placate him and restore peace. It had the opposite effect. Emboldened by what he perceived as a victory and a validation of his power, Susanoo's true nature erupted. His resentment, jealousy, and rage were finally unleashed upon his sister's perfect realm. He began a rampage of cosmic vandalism, systematically destroying the symbols of her divine order. He trampled the intricate divisions of her sacred rice paddies, ruining the celestial harvest. He defiled the holy hall where the first fruits were celebrated, a place of supreme sanctity. His actions were a direct assault on everything she represented: agriculture, ritual, and civilization. Amaterasu's attendants were frightened, but she initially tried to excuse his behavior, attributing it to his wild nature. But his fury was not yet spent. The rampage reached a terrifying climax. As Amaterasu sat with her attendants in the sacred weaving hall, peacefully working at their looms, Susanoo committed his most heinous act. He tore a hole in the roof of the sacred building and dropped the skinned carcass of a celestial horse among the terrified weavers. The ensuing panic and shock caused one of Amaterasu's most cherished attendants to be fatally wounded by her own weaving shuttle. This final, brutal violation shattered Amaterasu's spirit. The desecration of her sacred space and the loss of her attendant were too much to bear. Her world of light and order had been completely undone by her brother's unchecked fury. Overwhelmed by grief and fear, she saw only one path of escape. She fled from her broken palace, seeking a refuge from the chaos, a place where no one could ever hurt her again. Finding the rock cave of heaven, she sealed herself inside, plunging both the heavens and the earth into a profound and terrifying abyss. The fragile peace on the high celestial plane was destined to be shattered. Amaterasu, in her infinite patience, had hoped her brother's wild spirit would eventually be tamed. She had retreated to the sanctity of her sacred weaving hall, the Imi-hata-dono, a place of immense purity and cosmic importance. Here, with her attendants, she wove the very fabric of the universe, garments for the gods, banners for celestial ceremonies, the tangible threads of order and harmony. The rhythmic clatter of the looms was a sound of creation itself, a steady heartbeat in a well-ordered world. It was a sanctuary of peace, a testament to her role as the ultimate civilizing force. But Susanoo, the Lord of Storms, respected no boundaries. His resentment had festered into a destructive rage that could no longer be contained. In an act of ultimate profanity, he ascended to the roof of the sacred hall. With a great crash, he tore a hole in the thatch, violating the pristine structure. Through the opening, he committed his most unforgivable transgression. He cast down the hide of a celestial horse, an animal that had been flayed backwards, an act of supreme defilement in their divine culture, a symbol of reversing the natural order of life. The sight was an abomination. Chaos erupted within the serene hall. The sacred looms fell silent. Her divine weaving maidens, who had known only harmony, were thrown into a state of shock and terror. In the pandemonium, one of Amaterasu's most beloved attendants stumbled in her fright. A weaving shuttle, sharp and heavy, struck her, and her life was tragically extinguished. The sanctity of the hall was not only broken, it was stained by an accidental but deeply grievous death. For Amaterasu, this was the final, unbearable outrage. Her brother had not merely insulted her, he had desecrated her sacred space, terrified her attendants, and brought an end to an innocent life. Her authority, her purity, and her very essence had been violently assaulted. The grief and shame that washed over her were absolute. The light she embodied seemed to flicker, overwhelmed by the sheer audacity of the violation. This was not a sibling rivalry anymore. It was an attack on the very foundations of divine law. And in that moment of profound horror and personal humiliation, the sun goddess made a fateful decision. She would no longer shine upon a world that contained such malice. The echo of the tragedy in the weaving hall resonated through the soul of Amaterasu. It was a wound far deeper than any physical blow. Her brother's act had been a calculated strike against everything she represented: order, purity, creation, and light. The joy she took in illuminating the heavens and nurturing the world below was extinguished, replaced by a profound sense of disillusionment and sorrow. How could she continue to bestow her blessings upon a realm where such sacrilege could occur, committed by her own kin? The weight of her divine responsibility suddenly felt like an impossible burden. Her radiance, once a source of pride, now felt like a spotlight on her own humiliation. In her heart, a cold resolve formed. She turned away from her duties, from the pleas of other deities, and from the world that depended on her. Her retreat was not a flight of simple fear, but a powerful, deliberate act of withdrawal. It was a statement of cosmic protest. She, the source of all life and warmth, would remove herself from existence. She journeyed across the high celestial plane, her usual brilliant aura now dimmed with sorrow. The celestial fields and shimmering rivers seemed to bow as she passed, sensing the gravity of her departure. The very air grew cooler, the ambient light of the heavens beginning to fade with each step she took. Her destination was a place of solitude and finality, a sanctuary where the world could not reach her. She sought an impenetrable fortress to shield her from the pain and shame that Susanoo's actions had inflicted upon her. she found what she was looking for in a deep, formidable rock cave, a place untouched by time. Its entrance was a dark, silent mouth set into the celestial landscape. Without a moment of hesitation, Amaterasu stepped inside, leaving the ordered world behind. With a final surge of divine strength, born not of joy but of profound grief, she rolled a colossal boulder across the entrance. The stone, unimaginably massive, ground into place, sealing the passage completely. From within the suffocating confines of her new prison, she heard the stone settle, a sound of absolute finality. The last sliver of her divine light vanished from the outside world, and an unprecedented silence began to fall. The moment the great stone sealed the entrance to the heavenly rock cave, a change occurred that was more profound than any storm or earthquake. It was not a sound, but an absence. The persistent, life-giving glow of the high celestial plane, the very essence of its existence, simply ceased. A deep and unnatural twilight descended, swallowing the vibrant colors of the divine realm. The shimmering bridges, the crystal rivers, and the jeweled palaces of the gods were all rendered in muted shades of gray. A chill, unknown in a realm of eternal sunshine, began to creep through the heavens. This was not the gentle, cyclical night that brings rest, but a permanent, stagnant gloom, a negation of reality itself. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Down in the central land of reed plains, the mortal world, the consequences were even more direct. The sun vanished from the sky in an instant. There was no sunset, no warning, just an abrupt plunge into a cold, unending dusk. Panic and confusion spread across the land. Farmers looked to the sky, bewildered. Animals fell silent, their natural rhythms thrown into chaos. The world, which had always operated on the reliable promise of dawn, was now adrift in a timeless gloom. The cave itself, Ame no Iwato, became a focal point of this new, bleak reality. It was more than a geological feature. It was now a symbol of cosmic absence, a tomb for the world's light. The boulder blocking its entrance was no ordinary rock. It was an object of immense power, placed there by the will of the sun goddess herself. It represented her unyielding grief and her absolute rejection of the world. No god, no matter how strong, could hope to move it by force. It was a barrier of emotion as much as of stone. The universe held its breath. The gods on the celestial plane stared towards the sealed cave, their own divine light seeming feeble and inadequate in the encroaching cold. The laughter and music that usually filled the heavens were gone, replaced by a stunned, fearful silence. The world had lost its heart, its central, organizing principle. Amaterasu was gone, and with her, the certainty of life itself. The age of light had ended, and the age of shadows had begun. The perpetual twilight that had befallen the universe was not merely an inconvenience. It was a fundamental corruption of the natural order. Without the life-giving energy of Amaterasu, the world began to decay. In the fields of the mortal realm, the vibrant green shoots of rice withered and turned brown. The crops, once promised by the sun, failed completely, leading to the threat of widespread famine. Flowers refused to bloom, their heads perpetually bowed in the gloom. Trees shed their leaves as if in a permanent, joyless autumn. The very processes of growth and renewal had ground to a halt. But the physical decay was only the beginning. The true danger lay in what thrived in the absence of light. Amaterasu's radiance was not just a source of warmth, it was a ward against chaos, a purifying force that kept malevolent influences at bay. With her light gone, these entities were no longer suppressed. From the dark corners of the earth and the shadowy realms between worlds, a multitude of wicked spirits and unruly kami began to emerge. Their voices, once whispers, now became a cacophony that filled the air. The world was filled with discord, The sounds of lamentation rose from humanity, a constant murmur of fear and want. In the heavens, the situation was just as dire. The gods themselves were disoriented and fearful. Their own powers seemed diminished, their domains thrown into disarray without the central, regulating force of the sun. The high celestial plane, once a realm of perfect harmony, became a place of anxiety and disorder. The gods bickered, blaming one another for the catastrophe, with many casting their anger towards the unrepentant Susanoo. The world was regressing. The order that the gods had so carefully constructed was unraveling, threatening to return the universe to the formless, chaotic state it had been in before creation. The distinction between day and night, good and evil, order and chaos, was blurring into a single, miserable twilight. The world was sick, and its fever was the growing influence of these negative forces. The gods knew that this could not continue. If Amaterasu did not return, everything they knew, both heaven and earth, would be consumed by the encroaching shadows. Desperation became the catalyst for action. As the world withered below and chaos spread through the heavens, the celestial deities understood that their existence was at stake. A grand council was convened. The Yaoyorozu no Kami, the 8 million gods of the divine pantheon, gathered at the tranquil, dry riverbed of Ame no Yasukawa. This sacred meeting place, usually a site of serene beauty, was now charged with an atmosphere of unprecedented urgency. Every deity, from the most powerful architects of creation to the minor kami of streams and trees, was present. Their combined anxiety was a palpable force, a low hum of divine energy that vibrated in the gloomy air. They looked to each other for answers, but found only shared fear in the faces of their peers. The central question was clear. How could they possibly persuade the sun goddess to leave her self-imposed exile? The boulder that sealed the heavenly rock cave was a monument to her resolve. To attempt to move it by force would be a grave insult, a violation of her grief that would surely drive her away forever. They needed a solution that was not born of power, but of wisdom and ingenuity. The debate began, with countless suggestions offered and dismissed. Some proposed formal apologies, others grand offerings, but none seemed sufficient to mend a wound so deep. As the council reached an impasse, a new voice emerged, one known for its unparalleled intellect. Omoikan, the kami of wisdom and deliberation, stepped forward. He was a being whose thoughts could encompass all possibilities, who could see the threads of cause and effect that were invisible to others. Silence fell over the assembly as the millions of gods turned their attention to him. Omoikane did not offer a simple solution. Instead, he proposed something entirely unexpected, a plan that relied not on pleading or power, but on psychology, curiosity, and even divine comedy. It was a strategy so audacious and so clever that it left the other gods momentarily stunned. The plan was intricate, requiring the specific talents of many different deities working in perfect concert. It was a gamble, a delicate celestial performance designed to pique the interest of a goddess who had sworn off the world. The fate of the universe would not be decided by a battle, but by a carefully orchestrated pageant. As Omoikane outlined the details, a spark of hope, the first in a long time, began to flicker among the assembled gods. The world was suspended in an endless, chilling twilight. In the high plane of heaven, the 8 million gods, the celestial assembly, were lost in a state of profound crisis. With the sun goddess Amaterasu sealed away in the rock cave of heaven, the source of all life and warmth was gone. Crops withered in the perpetual gloom, malevolent spirits began to stir in the shadows, and a palpable sense of despair settled over both the heavens and the earthly realm of the reed plains. The initial shock had given way to a gnawing fear. Their world was unraveling, and the very fabric of existence was threatened by the absence of its most essential deity. Frantic arguments and desperate pleas had achieved nothing. The stone door of the cave remained stubbornly shut, a monument to a goddess's profound hurt and a world's resulting sorrow. Into this chaos of divine panic stepped a beacon of calm and reason, Omoikane, the god of wisdom and deliberation. He was not a warrior god of immense physical strength, nor a deity of flashy elemental power. His strength was his mind, a repository of insight and strategy. As the other gods lamented, Omoikane observed, considered, and analyzed. He understood that brute force would be useless against the rock door and, more importantly, against the wounded heart of the sun goddess herself. They could not command her to return. They had to entice her. They had to create a scenario so compelling, so utterly irresistible, that her own curiosity would become the key to their salvation. He called for an assembly, gathering the myriad deities in the dry, echoing bed of the tranquil river of heaven. His voice, quiet yet firm, cut through the clamor of distress. He laid out the foundations of a plan, not of force, but of divine stagecraft. It was a strategy built on psychology, spectacle, and a deep understanding of Amaterasu's own nature. He proposed they create a celebration, a festival of such magnitude and joy that it would seem impossible in a world devoid of light. They would not beg for her return. They would act as if a new, even brighter light had already appeared. This audacious idea initially met with confusion. How could they celebrate in such dire circumstances? But as Omoikane elaborated, a spark of hope ignited among the assembled gods. The plan was intricate, requiring the unique talents of many different deities. It would be a collaborative masterpiece of divine ingenuity, a testament to their collective will to bring back the sun. The first steps were clear. They would need to craft sacred objects of unparalleled beauty, items that could capture the attention of a goddess who was herself the embodiment of all that is radiant and beautiful. The great celestial forge was about to be rekindled for its most important task. With the blueprint for their celestial performance laid out by the wise Omoikane, the divine assembly turned from deliberation to creation. The plan required artifacts not merely of beauty, but of profound spiritual power, objects capable of captivating a goddess. Two masters of divine craftsmanship were summoned to perform their sacred duties. The first was Ishikoridome, the heavenly smith. He was tasked with forging a mirror, but not just any reflective surface. This was to be the Yata no Kagami, the eight-hand mirror, an object of such perfection it could hold the very essence of light. Ishikoridome ascended to the celestial mountains to gather the finest heavenly metals. His forge was not powered by common flame, but by a controlled, sacred fire. The hammering of his tools was a rhythmic chant, each strike imbuing the metal with purpose and divine energy. The smith worked tirelessly, polishing the disc until its surface was flawless, more brilliant than any star in the darkened sky. It was designed not only to reflect an image, but to capture and amplify the radiance of anyone who gazed into it, a perfect trap for the curious sun goddess. Simultaneously, another master artisan was at work. This was Tamanoya, the divine jeweler, tasked with crafting the Yasakani no Magatama, the grand string of jewels. He journeyed to the headwaters of the tranquil river of heaven, where he gathered 500 crescent-shaped jewels, each one shimmering with an internal luminescence. These were not mere stones. They were crystallized quintessences of purity and power. Tamanoya's work was one of delicate precision. He selected a branch from the sacred sakaki tree, a plant considered a conduit between the mortal and divine realms. With immense care, he began to string the 500 jewels onto the branch, arranging them in a pattern of cascading beauty. The finished necklace was a marvel, a waterfall of soft light and exquisite form. It was designed to be irresistible, an object of such profound allure that it would surely draw the eye of Amaterasu, the ultimate connoisseur of brilliance. These two creations, the mirror and the jewels, were more than props. They were prayers given form, physical manifestations of the god's desperate hope. They were placed with great ceremony upon the upper branches of a larger sakaki tree, which was then uprooted and placed directly before the sealed entrance of the rock cave, standing as a silent, glittering invitation. With the sacred artifacts in place, the gods prepared the next phase of their elaborate ruse. Omoikane's plan relied on manipulating not just sight, but sound. They needed to convince Amaterasu that a new dawn had arrived, that the world had moved on without her. To achieve this, they sought out the most reliable heralds of the morning, the long crowing roosters of the eternal land. These were no ordinary birds. They were magnificent creatures whose resonant calls were believed to possess the power to chase away the spirits of the night and summon the day. In the perpetual twilight that now gripped the heavens, their crowing would be a powerful and deeply symbolic act. The task of gathering them was given to Amenotag-Karau, a god of immense physical strength, who undertook the mission with surprising gentleness. He journeyed to the timeless lands where these birds roosted, their white feathers a stark contrast to the unending gloom. He did not capture them with force, but persuaded them, communicating the urgency of their quest. One by one, the roosters were brought to the high plane of heaven and placed on perches near the entrance to the rock cave. An eerie silence fell as the birds settled, their sharp eyes scanning the star-dusted darkness. They were a living orchestra, waiting for their cue. The gods understood the psychology at play. For countless ages, the crow of the rooster had been inextricably linked with the arrival of Amaterasu's light. Hearing that sound without seeing the accompanying sunrise would create a powerful cognitive dissonance for the goddess within the cave. It would plant a seed of doubt and confusion in her mind. Had another son been born? Had the world somehow righted itself without her? The tension among the assembled deities was immense. Everything depended on perfect timing and coordination. As the signal was given, a single, clear note pierced the silence. It was quickly joined by another, and then another, until the air was filled with a chorus of powerful, cascading crows. The sound echoed across the plains of heaven, a defiant cry against the oppressive darkness, a false dawn created through sheer force of will. Inside the cave, the goddess of the sun stirred, her solitude disturbed by the familiar yet utterly impossible sound of morning. The roosters crowed, their calls echoing a promise of a dawn that did not come. The sacred mirror and jewels gleamed in the faint starlight, a silent, beautiful plea. Yet, inside the cave, Amaterasu remained unmoved, her curiosity piqued, but not yet conquered. The gods grew anxious. Omoikane's plan was brilliant, but it was missing a crucial element, a spark of raw, untamed emotion. It needed a catalyst that was loud, shocking, and undeniably alive. It needed a spectacle so outrageous it would be impossible to ignore. At that moment, a goddess stepped forward from the assembly, a mischievous glint in her eyes. This was Ame no Uzume, the goddess of the dawn, mirth, and revelry. Where others saw a crisis, Uzume saw a stage. She was charismatic, audacious, and possessed a unique understanding of how to command attention. She declared that she would perform a dance, one that would make the very heavens shake. With a theatrical flourish, she found a large wooden tub used for making beverages, and, with a loud bang, overturned it in the clearing before the cave. This was to be her drum, her platform. Her preparations were a performance in themselves. She took vines from the heavenly climbing plants and fashioned them into a sash. She gathered leaves from the sacred sakaki tree to adorn her hair and her wrists. She held bundles of bamboo grass in her hands, ready to use them as percussive instruments. Then she began. Her dance was unlike anything the solemn gods had ever witnessed. It was not a graceful, measured ceremony. It was a wild, stamping, and utterly uninhibited display of pure energy. She stomped her feet upon the overturned tub, creating a thunderous rhythm that reverberated through the ground. She spun and gestured, her movements both comical and full of a potent, life-affirming energy. The performance became progressively more outrageous, more scandalous, a deliberate and joyful act of divine absurdity. At first, the other gods watched in stunned silence, their somber faces reflecting their confusion. But Uzume's energy was infectious. Her complete lack of inhibition, her celebration of life in the face of utter darkness, was a powerful antidote to their despair. A single chuckle broke the silence. Then another. Soon, a wave of unrestrained mirth began to build, a sound the heavens had not heard since the light had vanished. Uzume's wild, percussive dance reached its zenith. The spectacle she created was so startling, so profoundly and unexpectedly joyful, that it broke through the divine pall of gloom like a thunderclap. The initial, hesitant chuckles from the assembled gods transformed into a full-throated, rolling wave of laughter. 8 million deities, from the most powerful creators to the smallest nature spirits, were consumed by a singular, overwhelming moment of pure, unadulterated hilarity. The sound was not merely an expression of amusement, it was a cosmic force. It was the sound of hope rekindled, of tension released, of life defiantly roaring in the face of oblivion. The laughter cascaded across the high plane of heaven, shaking the very firmament. It was a sound so loud, so vibrant, and so full of life that it penetrated the thick stone door of the rock cave, a sound utterly alien to the silent, solitary world Amaterasu had created for herself. Inside, the sun goddess was bewildered. The crowing of the roosters had confused her, but this was incomprehensible. Laughter? How could there be laughter in a world she had plunged into cold and darkness? Joy was her domain. Celebration was powered by her light. The world was supposed to be weeping, begging for her return. Instead, it sounded as if a magnificent festival was taking place right outside her door. Her divine pride was stung. Her anger, which had been a solid wall of resolve, began to crack with fissures of intense curiosity. What could possibly be happening? What new source of light and happiness could have arisen to make the gods so merry? The thought was intolerable. She had to know. The sound of revelry was a direct challenge to her importance, a suggestion that the universe could, perhaps, find joy without her. Slowly, cautiously, she moved towards the entrance of her stone sanctuary. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of which could explain the thunderous mirth outside. Driven by an irresistible need to understand the source of this impossible joy, she placed her hands upon the immense stone that sealed the cave. With a deep, grinding groan that echoed through the heavens, she began to push it aside, just a fraction. A tiny sliver of space opened, not enough for her to exit, but just enough to peer out and witness the cause of the commotion that had shaken her from her self-imposed exile. Inside the heavenly rock cave, the silence was absolute. It was a silence born of divine will, a profound stillness that mirrored the cold, dark world Amaterasu had left behind. Her grief and anger were a heavy shroud, insulating her from the cosmos she had abandoned. For an age, this was her reality, unyielding stone, impenetrable shadow, and the echo of her own sorrow. But then, something changed. A sound, faint at first, managed to penetrate the stone and the goddess's self-imposed isolation. It was a sound utterly alien to her current state, a rhythm, a melody. It was music. It grew in volume, a vibrant, joyful noise that seemed to defy the very darkness she had created. Soon, another sound joined it. Laughter. not just a chuckle, but a wave of unrestrained, uproarious mirth that seemed to shake the very foundations of the plane of high heaven. The 80 myriads of gods had gathered, their combined celebration creating a force of sound and energy that even a sealed cave could not fully contain. Amaterasu was perplexed. How could this be? The world was meant to be suffering, plunged into a perpetual night without her radiance. Joy should have been impossible. Celebration should have been unthinkable. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. The festivities outside were growing more and more intense, the laughter reaching a fever pitch. This was the masterstroke of the goddess of mirth, Ame no Uzume. She had begun her performance, a wild and spirited dance that captivated the assembled deities, causing them to roar with delight. The sound was an assault on Amaterasu's senses and her certainty. Why were they so happy? Had they forgotten her so quickly? Had her absence, which she intended as a profound punishment, become a reason for revelry? The questions gnawed at her. Her anger warred with a new, unfamiliar feeling, a potent, undeniable curiosity. The goddess who had turned her back on the universe found herself straining to hear, trying to decipher the source of this impossible joy. The stone that had been her shield now felt like a barrier, separating her from a mystery she felt compelled to solve. Slowly, cautiously, she crept towards the massive rock that sealed the entrance. The laughter from the other side was a siren's call, pulling her from the depths of her despair. Her resolve, once as solid as the cave walls, began to show its first tiny crack. Compelled by a force stronger than her own indignation, Amaterasu pressed her shoulder against the immense stone door. With a low groan of grinding rock, a small gap opened, just wide enough for her to peer out into the inexplicably bright assembly of gods. The first thing she noticed was the joyous face of Ame no Uzume, the goddess of the dawn. Amaterasu called out, her voice raspy from disuse, demanding an explanation. "Why do you celebrate? Why do you laugh when the plain of high heaven and the central land of reed plains are shrouded in perpetual night without my light?" Ame no Uzume, without missing a beat in her dance, replied with a clever, calculated falsehood. "We rejoice," she declared for all to hear, "because we have found a goddess more illustrious and radiant than you, honorable one." The words struck Amaterasu like a physical blow. More radiant than she? The very thought was an affront to her identity, an impossibility that stung her divine pride. Who was this usurper? Who could possibly command such adoration in her place? Her curiosity now fully ignited, she pushed the rock further, determined to see this supposed rival for herself. As she leaned her head out of the cave entrance, her eyes still adjusting to the light, the god Ame no Futodama moved with practiced precision. He stood directly in her line of sight, holding aloft the Yata no Kagami, a magnificent 8-sided mirror forged by the divine smiths. It had been polished to such a perfect sheen that it captured and amplified any light that fell upon it. Amaterasu stared into its surface and was transfixed. Before her was a being of breathtaking beauty and power. Light poured from this goddess in waves, her eyes held the fire of stars, and her presence was one of absolute authority. She was, in every sense, the perfect image of a celestial ruler. Amaterasu was mesmerized, completely captivated by the vision. She felt an irresistible urge to get closer, to better see this incredible deity who shone with a brilliance that matched her own. In her astonishment, the sun goddess failed to realize the truth. She was not looking at a rival, but at her own reflection. The trap, so carefully laid by the god of wisdom, Omoikane, had been sprung. Her vanity, the very pride that had driven her into the cave, was now the key to luring her out. The universe held its breath. Amaterasu, entranced by the luminous being in the mirror, leaned further and further out of her stone sanctuary. The darkness that had clung to her for so long was being burned away, not by an external force, but by the rediscovery of her own light. She was completely unguarded, her mind consumed by the identity of this magnificent stranger. The gods, who had maintained their boisterous celebration to mask their true intent, watched with silent anticipation. The fate of heaven and earth rested on the next few seconds. This was the moment for which Ame no Tajikarao had been waiting. Known as the god of heavenly hand strength, he was renowned throughout the celestial realms for his unparalleled power. He had been positioned just beside the cave entrance, hidden from Amaterasu's view, a coiled spring of divine potential. As the sun goddess emerged, Tajikarao exploded into action. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. He moved with the speed of a striking falcon and the force of a tectonic shift. His powerful hand shot out, not to harm the goddess, but to grasp the solid rock of the cave door she had been leaning against. With a single, monumental effort, he pulled the great stone aside, fully exposing the entrance. In the same fluid motion, he reached in and took Amaterasu by the hand, drawing her completely out into the open plain before she could fully comprehend what was happening. The surprise on her face was absolute. The spell of the mirror was broken, but it was too late to retreat. She was outside, surrounded by the jubilant faces of the other gods. Before she could even think of darting back into her refuge, the god Futodama, who had presented the mirror, completed the final step of the plan. He swiftly cast a sacred rope, a shimenawa, across the entrance to the cave. This was no ordinary rope. It was a powerful divine ward. He declared that this place was now sealed, a boundary that could not be crossed again. Amaterasu's retreat was cut off. The door to her self-imposed exile was closed forever. There was no going back into the shadows. The strength of Tajikarao had not just moved a rock, it had shifted the balance of the cosmos. The instant Amaterasu was clear of the cave, the world transformed. It was not a gradual dawn, but an explosive, instantaneous reclamation. A wave of pure, golden light washed over the plain of high heaven, a warmth and brilliance that the assembled gods had almost forgotten. The oppressive, clinging shadows that had sapped the life from the cosmos vanished as if they had never been. The consequences were immediate and miraculous. Across the celestial plains and down in the terrestrial world, every living thing responded. Blades of grass that had drooped, pale and lifeless, now stood tall and drank in the radiant energy, their green color returning in a vibrant rush. Rivers that had grown sluggish and murky began to sparkle again, their waters dancing with renewed vigor. The very air, once thin and cold, now felt thick with life and possibility. The myriad gods who had been performing a calculated charade of joy now let loose a genuine, heartfelt roar of celebration. Their feigned laughter turned into true relief. Their anxious plan, a desperate gamble forged in the mind of the god of wisdom, had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. They had not merely tricked their queen, they had saved existence itself. Amaterasu stood in the center of it all, momentarily stunned by the swiftness of events. Her initial shock at being pulled from the cave gave way to awe at the scene unfolding around her. She saw the unfiltered joy on the faces of her fellow deities. She felt the world itself sigh in relief at her return. In that moment, the lingering bitterness and anger that had fueled her retreat began to dissolve in the warmth of her own light. She understood. Her role was not simply to possess this radiance, but to share it. Her presence was not a gift she could withhold, but a duty she was bound to fulfill. The darkness had been a consequence of her personal pain, but the light was a necessity for all of creation. The crisis was over. The celestial order was restored. The sun goddess, no longer a grieving recluse, but a ruler reminded of her profound responsibility, took her rightful place once more at the center of the heavens, her light banishing the last vestiges of the long night. Amaterasu's emergence from the heavenly rock cave was more than the return of daylight. It was the foundational event upon which a nation would build its identity. This was not merely the end of a celestial crisis, but the beginning of a divine mandate that would stretch across millennia, shaping the destiny of Japan. The myth became the charter for the world's oldest continuous monarchy. Having reasserted her authority and recognized her cosmic importance, Amaterasu's reign over the plane of high heaven was secure. But her attention soon turned to the world of mortals below, the central land of reed plains. It was a chaotic and untamed land, and she determined it needed divine order. To accomplish this, she made a monumental decision. She would not go herself, but would send her own grandson, Ninigi no Mikoto, to descend from the heavens and establish a dynasty on earth. This act, known as the descent of the heavenly grandchild, is the critical bridge between myth and political reality. Ninigi did not go empty-handed. Amaterasu bestowed upon him 3 sacred treasures, objects that had been central to her own story. First was the Yata no Kagami, the very mirror that had lured her from the cave, a symbol of truth and the sun goddess's own spirit. Second was the Yasakani no Magatama, the grand jewel that Ame no Uzume had worn during her celebratory dance, representing benevolence. Third was the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword her brother Susanoo had given her as an apology, a symbol of valor. These 3 items, the mirror, the jewel, and the sword, became the imperial regalia of Japan, the physical proof of the emperor's divine right to rule. According to the foundational texts of the nation, Ninigi's great-grandson was Jimmu, who became the first human emperor of Japan in 660 BCE. From Jimmu, an unbroken line of succession is claimed to extend all the way to the modern emperors. This lineage makes the ruler of Japan more than a political figure. It establishes them as a direct descendant of Amaterasu herself. The story of the cave is thus transformed from a tale of divine emotion into the ultimate justification for imperial power. The light that returned to the world now shines through the chrysanthemum throne, a sacred legacy born from a goddess's retreat into shadow.